All right, welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Big Blue Banter podcast. We're here to talk Giants football. The bye week is over. We had a good time last week discussing a lot of the mid-season topics for the Giants. We didn't get to everything we wanted to get to, so we're going to hit all of those topics today, get to the news and notes, get to the players we want to see more of in the second half of the season, get to the All-22 film, why we want to see more of those players, and we'll preview the Giants Week 10 game on Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers. But for now, I'm going to throw it over to my co-host, Nick. How you doing after a weekend off from Giants football?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm off from Giants football, but definitely still involved heavily and kind of missing it, to be honest. I didn't have a ton of stuff to do Monday and Tuesday and had a quick piece out, but besides that, doing well. But we're ready to get back at it.
Yeah, we're here no matter how the Giants do. So, 1-7, 1-9, wherever they fall to this season, we will be here. We'll continue. We'll preview what the good news is, what we're looking forward to with this team. There are a lot of players, to get excited about on this roster moving forward, regardless of what the record says. And as we know, as you guys know from listening in, we do put a lot of the blame on the quarterback position this season, at least. And that's bound to change this offseason. We will be here for all of that. The Giants have pretty much made it clear, they're going to go in a different direction there at quarterback this offseason. So we'll start there with the news and notes. On Tuesday, Pat Shurmur named Eli Manning his starting quarterback for the Week 10 game against the San Francisco 49ers. This did not come as a surprise to me based on me reading through the tea leaves. Did you think that, Nick, is this a surprise to you? Did you think he would turn to Kyle Lauletta or Alex Tanney already in Week 10?
We had said that I thought now was a good time to do it. I think that, I'm a little surprised, to be honest, just because now it goes into an area where you kind of don't know, and I guess it depends how Eli does. And I know they want to win games, obviously, dumb statement to make, but I'm saying I think the best quarterback possible is going to be the one they're going to put forward to win games, and I think it's going to be Tanney first, maybe, because of this situation that's unfolded with Lauletta, but I am a little surprised that it's happening this way.
Yeah, to me, the most interesting comments that Shurmur made with regard to the quarterback position were the ones he made about Alex Tanney and Kyle Lauletta, because he basically said, I feel comfortable turning to Tanney right now. And when they asked him about Lauletta, he said, well, he's still a young quarterback who has a lot to learn. And remember, he played at Division I at AA school last season at Richmond. So, he's still very raw. And so that kind of, throws a little bit of caution to the wind for those who believe that, Lauletta will be the guy to get the first shot. And we're going to get, a good large sample size of data when it comes to Kyle Lauletta at the quarterback position during this 2018 season. Because, I think at least based on those comments, Shurmur might make the decision to turn to Alex Tanney before Kyle Lauletta. Personally, I would not be in favor of this decision. We talked about it last podcast, and I'll say it again, while this is not surprising to me that Eli Manning is still the starter, it's not the decision I would make. I think that at this point, winning football games is not the most important thing for this Giants franchise. And I understand how hard that is, for a coach to grasp or for the players in the locker room to grasp. And at the same time, though, I don't think it's a guarantee that Eli Manning gives Giants a better chance to win them football games than Kyle Lauletta. Now, can you make the case that Alex Tanney gives the Giants a better chance to win than Kyle Lauletta? I'm not sure, but if the coaches believe that, it does make sense to why they would turn to him if Eli Manning continues to struggle. But it's definitely important to keep in mind that this is not the decision for the remainder of the 2018 season. Eli Manning is not a lock to be the starter. Pat Shurmur said it best. He said, I talked to Eli, and I told him, I basically told him what has gone down so far in the first 8 games is not going to be acceptable, if you want to continue to hold the job. He didn't essentially, he didn't come out and say those words, at least to the public. But I believe that that's kind of how the conversation went between those two. And, the one thing I did find to be a little bit troubling, Nick, and I get it. Again, you just talked about it yourself. But he basically said, Eli Manning's a starter, and I'm hoping that I don't have to make the decision to bench him. I'm hoping we go on a run. So to me, it's just a bit troubling because I just don't really see what there is to gain from going on a run right now with Eli Manning, with where the franchise is at. Is that something that kind of makes sense to you, Nick?
Yeah, just because you would almost then it gets into a spot. Well, what if you win 4 games in a row? Will you ever see Lauletta this year, right, or anyone else for that matter? And then it's just then it's just a matter of. I guess part of this gets back to I don't really want to dive back into this, but this is why I think you want a guy like Webb in the wings that has more experience that you want to kind of see. And then, if he plays well, then all of a sudden it's great because you have a great competition going on. But the Tanny element makes it just kind of funky. It's nothing against him, but he has one career start in his life, right, as a 30-year-old. And that's where I think the dynamic gets kind of funky, where it doesn't make sense going forward. Where, again, if Webb was here and he goes on a run, great. If it's Lauletta, great. But I don't know that both those players are not going to get a chance, obviously, and maybe one at this point.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far, Nick. I'm actually going to disagree with you on this, and it's healthy for us to disagree sometimes. But to me, the Webb decision was the right one to make this offseason, releasing him. I saw a quarterback on tape at Cal who was extremely slow at mental processing and worked through his progressions. This is something I also saw at practice when I was there in training camp a few days this offseason. The Giants were nice enough to grant me some press passes, and he threw a lot of interceptions those days, and he was really slow getting rid of the football. And that's something I saw in the preseason as well. I think that personally, these issues we've seen with Eli Manning when it comes to processing and get rid of the football and taking 31 sacks in 8 games on pace for a career high 62, they would be basically amplified, in my personal opinion, with Webb in the game. Now, I understand what you're saying, experience from a sense that he's been in the NFL a little bit longer, but his experience to me is about the same as Alex Tanny, because Tanny was on that Tennessee Titans roster for several years, learning behind, Mariota or whoever was there at quarterback during that time. And that's kind of essentially the same experience Webb got, Nick. So you kind of see what I mean there. It's not really, it's not an actual veteran, more of a veteran than Kyle Lauletta coming from a D2 school. But to me, I actually think Lauletta enters the NFL with a little bit more of a chance than Webb did, because Webb came from that air raid system at Cal, and Lauletta played in like 3 or 4 different offensive systems over there at Richmond, including some systems with pro style elements. So you kind of see where I'm coming from there.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It's the right counterpoint. Mine was more just looking for and basically a bona fide competition for Manning that you could have. And I know now, obviously we all know now that Webb was not the answer. I just think that it's more, I just don't think you can leave it to the point where Tanny is the number 2, I guess is the way to put it. And that's where it kind of gets into this spot now where, do you give Tanny a chance for 2 or 3 games? And again, then you're taking away from Lauletta. We don't know how this is going to shake out, but just right now, I think you wanted to start that process versus delaying that process.
I get it. And listen, here's the thing. It's possible going into this whole process with the decision to draft Kyle Lauletta in the 4th round, the Giants figured, hey, we got at least another full season no matter what out of Eli. They might have thought that Eli was going to thrive in this setting that they put him in this season with Pat Shurmur's offense, with the offensive line, having additions in the offseason. They might have thought, listen, we can afford to draft Lauletta because we have Manning. We don't have to play him in his rookie season. If that's the case, I understand the hesitancy to turn to him. But long-term, I just don't see what there is to gain from playing someone like Alex Tanny. It's similar to the Geno Smith situation from last season. I didn't see there was anything to gain from playing a retread veteran like Geno Smith. It turns out there wasn't. And on the same light, I get a little nervous. I get a little scared, Nick, when I hear Shurmur say things like, we hope we don't have to bench Manning. We hope he goes on a run. Because if that's the case, is it possible they're considering holding on to him as the starting quarterback for the 2019 season? That's something that, to me, would set this franchise back. Why? Because Eli Manning and the entire Manning family is not the type of family that takes pay cuts. It's not in their blood. It's not anything they've done at any point in their entire history. Peyton Manning was collecting 20+ million. Allocated. The Broncos were allocating 20+ million against the cap to hold Manning during his final season when he could barely throw the ball 15 yards down the field. Peyton Manning, that is. So if the Giants were to stick with Eli Manning, if he does go on some kind of run to end this 2018 season, well, then they're kind of locking themselves into keeping him with a $23.2 million salary cap hit on a team that's already allocated a lot of their cap space for the 2019 season, on a team that does have to extend Landon Collins, or at the very least franchise tag him, which would, again, allocate a lot of 2019 salary cap space towards another player. It's a very, very, very poor plan, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that. A 38-year-old Eli Manning, what he's shown on tape this season, is not going to help this franchise have another postseason next season, or even, get out of the doldrums of these 1-7 starts and back-to-back seasons. So to me, that's what scares me the most, Nick. The thought that maybe, just maybe, they think that a run can lead to maybe Manning, another year with Manning under center. And I hate to say that. Again, this has nothing to do with what Manning has given this franchise. This has nothing to do with the kind of player he was in 2011, 12, and 13, and the kind of player he's had to been with rosters that have been, ravaged by terrible draft picks and no investments on the offensive line. But at this stage in time, Nick, I just think it's extremely troubling that the Giants might be considering sticking with Manning for one more season.
And I think that, and I'm more short term. Like, I'm more thinking like, I think that's all 100%. But I'm also thinking like, what if he's struggling come the third quarter? Then you're gonna pull him on Monday Night Football,
right?
Like, and again, these are all little details. Like, does it really matter? But at the same time, I don't think that's really the right way to do it. What if he throws 2 or 3 picks against a defense that's kind of vulnerable? That's not cool. I don't think that's any better than what we just said. So yeah, I kind of don't get this, to be honest.
Yeah, and we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, again, we made it pretty clear we believe that Kyle Aleda can, one, help the Giants in the red zone. He was an incredibly accurate red zone passer in college, in the Senior Bowl, during the practice week, the MVP of the Senior Bowl, and in the red zone from a run game standpoint, where he can help open up Saquon Barkley in the run game by adding a zone read element to the Giants' rushing attack. But again, something the Giants do not feel like he can help with right now, at least. Manning is the starter, and we'll move on from there to a little bit of good news. And that was Pat Shurmur, his comment from Tuesday, not fully ruling out Jamon Brown from starting right away after the Giants claimed him on waivers from the Los Angeles Rams last week. This week in Monday Night Football, I would not be surprised if Brown's starting based on what Shurmur said. Shurmur said, we're going to try to get him in there right away. And he basically said there's not that much. He's not that far from behind from the point of playing. And so I love this move if the Giants do decide to go with Brown as their starting right guard this week against the 49ers right away. They just need more data on these guys. They just need, let's be honest. John Greco's not going to be the Giants starting right guard next season. Let's be honest. Patrick Omameh is probably not going to be the Giants starting right guard next season. But if you put Brown in now, you give the franchise a chance to find a starting right guard at the cost of nothing. They didn't give up any assets to get him. He's under contract cheap based on his rookie deal. And he's somebody who could really be a key piece to helping this offensive line rebuild because they didn't have to invest or allocate any 2019 offseason assets to get him. So to me, this would be an excellent decision. Nick, do you see it any differently?
No, they're going to need it with who they're going up against in pass pro with DeForest Buckner this week. But yeah, so there's that element. Greco is not holding up in many facets that way. I think he has a shot at being the backup center. I think that's a good spot for him. But for a guy that, is in every play against the 3 techs in this division and in this league, I think that's tough. So yeah, 100% agree there.
And we'll see because, it's not a lock that, in all likelihood, he will come into the Giants as a right guard or a left guard, or obviously not a left guard, but a right guard or a backup, left, right guard type player. But remember, Jamon Brown did have over 30 starts at Louisville at both left and right tackle. So with the way the right tackle position is shaping up for the Giants, now again, I don't think this will happen. I think he will be a right guard for the Giants. But listen, Chad Wheeler has been arguably, at least according to Pro Football Focus, the worst right tackle in the NFL this season on a per snap basis. Brian Mahalik behind him let's be honest, this is a guy who converted from defensive end to offensive tackle at the NFL level just a couple years ago. Can you really count on him at right tackle? So, just something to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be totally surprised if Brown maybe gets some snaps at right tackle later this season or whenever he gets in, if the Giants feel like, they need to mix things up and kind of see where he can help this line the most. Is that something you think is possible, or do you just kind of think, he was a college offensive tackle, Nick, but he really doesn't have what it takes to play it in the pros?
I think overall his frame, his 340 size, and his overall, I forget his arm length off the top of my head. But yeah, I think he could. I think he has the versatility to do that. I think he's better than the 2 guys that you just mentioned if they wanted to push him out. From a technical standpoint, his footwork's not unreal. It's not the strength of what he does. That's not what drives him in his recovery. It's his hands. So I'm still okay with that from a tackle perspective. I think he probably hasn't vertical set in a while from a technical standpoint. So that's maybe something to kind of worry about. But again, I think it could be better than the 2 options that they have right now. So yeah, it's not something that would surprise me, but I do think that they want him in the spot where he'll thrive the most, especially coming to the door. So that would be guard.
Yeah. Long term for sure, it's definitely better to have him at right guard. But, if their focus is what Shurmur claims to win games in 2018, it's definitely possible that a formation with or a lineup with Greco and and Brown at right tackle might be better than Brown and Wheeler at right tackle. Brown at right guard, Wheeler at right tackle. But again, I think long term it definitely makes more sense at right guard. So that's probably where we'll see him. Something to keep an eye on. That's kind of it for the news and notes since our last podcast. Again, the Giants have been off for a full week with the bye week. But something I did find interesting, Nick, that I wanted to talk to you about was the success that Mike Solari is having down in Seattle with the Seattle Seahawks. So Mike Solari, Giants offensive line coach from 2016 to 2017, they moved on from him with Ben McAdoo and the old staff. They brought in Hal Hunter. And let's just kind of take a look at how that decision played out. So, Solari took a lot of the blame for the Giants' offensive line issues in 2016, 2017. Meanwhile, the Giants did not add a single player in the 2016 or 2017 NFL draft on the offensive line. Free agency-wise, they gave him one player, DJ Fluker, who he turned into the best player on the Giants' offensive line as a run blocker last season. And likely overall, he was probably, if you really break it down, he was probably the Giants' best offensive lineman on a per-snap basis last season, DJ Fluker. That's the only guy they gave him. The Giants and Jerry Reese had him enter the season, Solari. They said, here, Mike Solari, your offensive tackles are Eric Flowers, Bobby Hart, and Marshall Newhouse. Find a way to make this offensive line competent. And guess what? The Giants allowed 31 sacks last season over the entire season with these guys at offensive tackle position and injuries to their only two, above average offensive linemen, Weston Richburg and Justin Pugh. Meanwhile, the Giants have already allowed 31 sacks this season with new offensive line coach Hal Hunter, guys they added in free agency at both left tackle, left guard, and right guard. And in addition to that, the Giants are on pace to have 62 sacks in the offense this season, Nick. Guess how many sacks Hal Hunter's offensive line had the last time he was in the NFL with the 2016 Cleveland Browns?
I cheated. I found 66.
I was going to say, it's 66 sacks the Browns allowed in 2016 with Hal Hunter as their offensive line coach. Here's the rest of the timeline. In 2017, Hal Hunter was out of the NFL. In 2018, his Giants offensive line is on pace to allow 62 sacks. What the hell was this team doing hiring Hunter, for starters? Why the hell, did they let Mike Solari go? And meanwhile, right now, Solari is earning praise from just about everyone on Twitter, breaking down how he's revamped the Seattle Seahawks offensive line, the Seattle Seahawks run game. He's adding elements to the Seahawks run game every single week. DJ Fluker's playing great football there. The Seahawks gave him nothing. They didn't draft anyone this season to help that offensive line. It's essentially the same offensive line the Seahawks had in 2017 when they were one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, with the exception of the addition of Fluker and Solari as the offensive line coach. These are just the type of moves to me that really, really make me take a step back, calm down for a second, Nick. I know I'm getting animated, and think, what the hell is this franchise doing? Because Hal Hunter, to me, should not be the Giants offensive line coach right now. I know you hate to call for guys' jobs, Nick, but I don't. I'll call for it. I did it on the last podcast. I'm going to do it again. This guy has to go. And if they get a guy like Solari in there this next offseason, they have to find a way to keep those guys. Because when you look at what caused the Giants' offensive line struggles, it was a managerial issue. You've talked about it, Nick. They never provided competition on the offensive line during Jerry Reese's entire tenure. Well, guess what? They also didn't give Solari many major assets on that offensive line via the draft or free agency. So, this is just something that really bothered me, Nick, and I wanted to get your take on it as well.
Yeah, Solari is a really good coach. And specifically, I think you got to say his ability within the run game. He made the Giants run game multiple in the last couple of years, and meaning they could do a lot of different things on the rushing side of the game. So Orleans Darkwa, I think his success was almost solely attributed to from a schematic standpoint to Solari. So Solari goes to Seattle, where Tom Cable was there for how long? 4 or 5 years. And Tom Cable was notoriously a zone-only guy. His answer for everything is zone, which is great. It's a big school of thought that went through the NFL, like all other cyclical things that go through the NFL. He has since gone on the Raiders, and the Raiders are having their issues. Solari comes in, he's able to run a multiple front with the same talent, and they have success. And that's what guys are kind of amazed at. The guys like Doug Farrar in Seattle that cover the team pretty well, and guys like I guess Ben Baldwin too. Guys like that are kind of amazed that, hey, this group had this talent. So Solari had that. I think the one thing that has to be kind of talked about, though, is that the head coach, when you come in as a new head coach and there's basically a broken team that you're taking over, they often clean the slate of everyone in terms of the coaches, just because it's hard. it's hard. This whole thing doesn't work in the NFL unless if all the coaches are on the same page. So if there's one guy that's not on the same page, that's a problem. I'm guessing that Solari was fired because he probably had no relationship with Pat Shurmur. That's probably the issue. But again, I don't know who you're going to blame in that situation, because it's like, it's Shurmur's really decision, I would think, unless if somehow the GM group and personnel group is influencing that, or the owner. So yeah, I see it as an unfortunate set of circumstances. I don't even remember what Hunter's relationship is to Shurmur in general. I think it's hard. I think in this league, there's a lot of good offensive line coaches. I think there's a lot of mediocre offensive line coaches. Right now, you're not getting an offensive line coach that's really helping the unit from what we can see from a tape perspective. We're not in the meetings. We're not in all the other things with that, for the team. So you can only judge what you know about. And so I think that's kind of where it comes from. I think it's a tough circumstance versus it's an unfortunate circumstance versus any blame that can really go around. And I do think that, again, if the change is going to be made, it's going to be made there first, for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? Taking a step back for a second, Nick, I do think you're right. I mean, a new coach comes in, Pat Shurmur. He's worked with Hal Hunter before during their time together in Cleveland when Shurmur was the head coach of the Browns. And, he's going to bring in his own guys. I get that. I totally understand that. But not everyone on the staff was brand new. There were staff members that were retained for starters. And at the same time, you look at it right now, and Solari's basically a folk hero right now in Seattle. I talked to Derek Lewis, our Seahawks 24/7 sports writer, and he tells me about how the fans revere him right now. I mean, he is viewed as just kind of guy who came in and saved this offensive line because, again, they really didn't make that many additions to the offensive line. And you then look back at the 2017 season, and he jump-started that Giants run game. We saw it start basically once McAdoo was out, and they started to use a little bit more 12 personnel. And they were big rushing games. Solari's offensive line tore up the Redskins, tore up the Broncos. And at the same time, like I said, the pass protection was actually somehow better than the pass protection this season. And with the exception of that first game against the Cowboys in the 2017 season, the stunts really didn't kill the Giants. There wasn't as many communication issues as we see now from Hal Hunter's offensive line. And that was with Eric Flowers, the blindside pass protector, a left tackle for the Giants last season in 2016. That was with Bobby Hart at right tackle until they tried to move Pugh there for a little and Beeler. I mean, he really had so much less talent to work with than Hal Hunter has had. And the results were, noticeable. So that's going to be a key thing for the Giants this offseason, finding a new offensive line coach that will work. And to me, I think they'd be absolutely foolish not to at least give a call to Mike Munchak, Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line coach, well-renowned as the best offensive line coach in the NFL, a guy who has dealt with multiple injuries in Pittsburgh and has still put together a top 2, 3, 4 offensive line year after year after year. The Steelers haven't given him a first or second round pick on the offensive line in years. They're still dealing with old early round picks like David DeCastro and Pouncey, two players who are great, but at the same time, the rest of that offensive line is filled with lesser known guys that he's turned into big name, high quality players. Now, it's not going to be easy to get a guy like Munchak. He was rumored to be a head coaching candidate for the Arizona Cardinals last offseason. But right now, he's an offensive line coach. And the one way you can get around the salary cap in the NFL is with coaching hires. The Giants are a franchise that hasn't been afraid to spend in the past. I think it would be foolish to not at least call up Munchak this offseason and say, hey, we can give you a promotion from offensive line coach to offensive coordinator. We can allow you to completely revamp an NFL team, the Giants team rushing game, in your image, and we're going to also give you the best talent in the NFL at the running back position in Saquon Barkley. We'll give you all those things, and we'll give you a raise. Well, and they got to offer him a ton of money to move on from the Steelers, in my opinion. But this is just something I think would be a really interesting move for the Giants this offseason to, give a guy like Mike Munchak a call. What do you think about that potential out of the box thought, Nick?
I like the out of the box, but you'd have to get rid of Shula then.
Yeah, you'd have to get rid of Shula. And to me, I don't see any reason why Shula belongs on this team right now. I'm sorry to say it, but I have been completely I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong or if you think of this differently, but I'm not a Shula guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the offense is tough to judge just because it's been 8 terrible games and not terrible, but 8 poor games, marginal games, whatever word you want to describe it.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think that the one thing I think that all these guys are coaching for their jobs 110%. And I am actually not sold that if they go 1-16, that Shurmur's not out the door.
There's no way they're doing it. This is not I'm telling you, Nick, I understand why you might think that, but this Giants franchise doesn't move on from coaches that fast. The Ben McAdoo thing was unheard of.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point too from historical perspective. I'm just thinking if it gets ugly because it's kind of you could say the trend is going that way. I'm not sure that there's been enough time yet to automatically to throw the door down and then to have a guy like Shermer work with another guy that he's never worked with. If you fire the offensive coordinator, no matter what the role is, it could be Kyle Shanahan. After one season, you basically have the coach on the hot seat in some level, right? And so then if you're going to bring in Munchak and they've never worked before, I think the next guy that Shermer is going to want to bring in is someone that he's worked with before. The guy from the Minnesota QB coach they promoted, or guys from the St. Louis time when he was in St. Louis, that type of thing where it's not going to be. Because right now, the one thing I will say is, all these guys have never worked together besides the one-offs like Hunter and Shermer, but all the main people or the biggest voices in the room have not done that yet. So I think the next move, if Shermer's still in the seat, would be to bring in someone who he can trust that he has worked with before. I just think it has to go that way.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the Shermer point goes, Nick, I wouldn't expect a change there under most circumstances. Now, they moved on from McAdoo quick because the locker room, McAdoo lost the locker room. But so far this season, I know we've talked about this on past podcasts, I think this team's still playing hard. I think I think their issues on offense aren't effort issues. They're just actual, all the things we've broken down, inconsistencies in the red zone, consistencies in the run game with the blocking, with the quarterback play. So to me, unless this team quits on him, he'll be there. But you do make a good point about, him having coaches that he's used to coaching with and that understand his philosophy overall. But speaking of, the run game, I wanted to know if in 2018, Nick, after kind of we took some time this break during the bye week to kind of re-look at some of the all-22 from the past games, this first 8 games of the season. And, is the run game something the Giants can fix in 2018 and then have that carry over into the 2019 season? Or do you think it's kind of a lost cause for this year?
I think that if you're not going to change if you're going to have a static, if the coaches are going to stay where they are now, so you're going to have the same rough philosophy going forward of a lot of inside zone and a lot of duo. I think that they can't improve it. And this is kind of leading into the piece that I wrote 2 days ago. I don't think that they can improve that unless if they add other elements to dress it up. And the idea that I here 2 weeks ago, and then, like I said, then wrote about it, was using a zone read element with a mobile quarterback. Because if you're running a basic scheme like inside zone, and the backside of the defense is crashing so hard every time, or most times, there's no other way to do it. So I think that you have to have some sort of schematic relief to help the running game going forward. With a guy like Barkley, you absolutely have to think that it's salvageable, or that you can have success. This week is a good example against that. San Francisco's front seven does not have a lot of dynamic guys besides a few key players, but you can run on them, and you can run on them against their athletic strength. And so for me, I think if you can't do this here this week, I think you have to start looking at other elements like zone read, other types of read options, read option in general, which is the same thing, and go from there. Because again, if they're not going to use misdirection, if they're not going to use multiple schemes, if it's going to be very basic, they got to have better personnel in there.
Yep, and that's something we'll have to see moving forward if they will make that change, at quarterback to open up some of those options in zone read. But just in general, I think that if this offense can't get the run game going over the final 8 games, that's kind of the final factor for me in getting rid of not only Hal Hunter, but for me, potentially Mike Shula. But that time will tell in that regard. I have another question for you, Nick, just kind of based on what you're seeing from the All-22. So here's a guy, Nate Solder, who they signed to the richest contract on an annual basis this offseason for an offensive tackle. And through the first 8 games, he's allowed 6 sacks. And that's a lot of sacks. But according to Pro Football Focus, outside of those 6 plays that resulted in sacks, he's actually been pretty solid in his blocking. He has an above average grade there, the offensive tackle position. In addition to that, guys like Jeff Schwartz, former Giants offensive lineman turned analyst, have said, have mentioned that some of these sacks that are being blamed and credited on to Solder for are really the fault of the quarterback for bailing too early. And Solder recovers in his block, but at the same time, Manning had already moved to a point in the pocket where it was much easier to, where the sack is really the quarterback's fault instead of the offensive tackles. Do you believe that Solder's salvageable, or is this the type of player that they might have to eat a ton of dead salary cap money on to move on from?
I think he's more than salvageable. I think he's actually pretty solid. I've watched 2 games just this afternoon, specifically looking at him, and I misjudged it. I wasn't watching him closely when I was looking at the All-22, and you go back and watch individual players, it's funny what you see. And, he has some defeats, but the defeats in the Redskins game, I didn't realize he only had 1 major defeat in the Redskins game that led to a sack, and that it was against one of the best, basically, pass rushers in the NFL, and Ryan Kerrigan, with a speed to power rush that he basically pulls over into the quarterback. You could just imagine you had a great quarterback back there who's the most mobile guy. I would still put that on Solder, and guys are going to get beat. And specifically, his issues, I think, are very, 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 it's very specific. For him, the way he pass sets and the way he's being told to pass set. So what we mean by pass set is the way he goes into his pass protection. There's kind of like 3 or 4 major ways that guys do it. The way he's being told to do it or instructed to do it from a vertical perspective, going backwards, he has a technical flaw a little bit that has shown up in his previous tape, and Jeff Schwartz highlights this perfectly. It's his shoulders to the line of scrimmage; they become perpendicular, and when you do that, there's all types of issues that can come after. That specifically leaves him vulnerable to some speed rushes. That's what Takk McKinley did against him in the Atlanta game. So, but if you take that out of the equation, and it's actually happening at a very low percentage of the time, hence the high PFF grades, he's actually very good. And not only that, I didn't realize how athletic he was. He can recover from almost any position in terms of being, and so I'm describing poor positions when your shoulders are perpendicular to the line of scrimmage. He recovers from that regularly with his feet, with his hands. He's got very good lateral agility. He understands when he's doing that, and he is at its best, like most of the line, when they're running a lot of play action pass sets. So when play action pass sets, you're as a lineman, you're able to move forward and engage first without going back vertically. The Giants have to do more of that. And I guess that's like the one schematic thing that they're lacking in, I would absolutely have to say, because they're bottom half of the league in play action usage. They need to bump that higher. They do not have the offensive line. And by the way, guys don't realize this: 3rd down, I don't give a shit. Run play action. It still has the effect of holding the linebackers. They have to, not just linebackers, the front 7, they have to play run first. So you want to be in 3rd manageable, but that still has some level of effect there. And I think they have to use it because guys like him really benefit from it. So I think it's more than salvageable. I think it's a tough situation this year where he's had defeats 100%. But where I was on this podcast before saying, hey, they may bump him to right tackle because he hasn't played so well. I still think he hasn't played as well as he can, but I'm not saying that they should bump him yet. Nor do I think that he's actually, he's right there with Hernandez as 2 of the best guys on the line.
Yeah, and that's an interesting take because, before this and before I kind of took another look myself, it kind of felt the same way. I kind of felt differently, or, like that Will Hernandez might have been the top performer on the offensive line. But the more I watch, the more I see Soldiers playing pretty solid football. And he's a guy who they're going to, he's not going to live up to his contract. That's obvious. He's not going to be an elite left tackle like Tyron Smith when he's healthy, or Trent Williams. But you know what? He's going to be a solid to above average left tackle, in my opinion, with the right quarterback in this system. And I hate to come down hard on Eli Manning, but I do think some of these sacks are his fault. So again, that's just something looking forward. I think me and you are both confident that Nate Solder can be a part of the solution. And that's a good thing because there's been a lot of talk that he can't. And, one fewer position to fix on this offensive line is always a good thing with the state of the offensive line right now. But, Solder's not the only guy on this team. There's a lot of young players who are going to play in the second half of the season moving forward. And we're going to get a look at guys like Lorenzo Carter, Jamon Brown, Tay Davis, who you talked about on the last podcast, Grant Haley at cornerback, Sean Chandler, big nickel packers at safety, nickelback, RJ McIntosh, who was just activated today or yesterday, and he will be on the active roster, I believe, this Monday night. I'm not sure if he'll get any snaps, but he's going to be activated, and they moved on from player to put him in the lineup. Mario Edwards. So to you, out of those guys, Nick, out of those young guys, who are you most looking forward to seeing in the second half of the season?
It's got to be Brown first, and then you get into Davis, Haley, and Chandler. Of all those guys, I would have to say I think Chandler would be my biggest target, only because to see if his physicality can show on tape from from his college time. And again, I come at this a lot of the way, not from like the way I feel about guys, but from the way I think the team will feel about guys. The team values physicality. They value aggressiveness. That's why Curtis Riley is still the starting free safety. I think they want guys with his type of profile to be able to flourish because they can't basically pay for higher priced items. So in that mind, I think Chandler can. I think it's gonna be cool to see if he does, because it would be, again, a really good story and just something that I think he could crack that starting lineup and stay there, and we will see if it happens.
Yeah, and Chandler's story really is awesome. He bounced around homeless shelters as a child. Basically had to be the father in his family, and he's really worked hard to get to where he is now. So I hope that you're right. But I'm actually most interested to see what Tae Davis does over the remainder of the season. And Tae Davis is a guy who you actually put me on to, Nick, during our last podcast. And I looked back at his game tape in the game he got to start with, or he got to play a lot with Alec Ogletree out. And there really is a lot to work with there. He's raw, but he's really athletic and he's really fast. And he's maybe what the Giants were hoping Ray Armstrong would be from that coverage linebacker, that lengthy, rangy linebacker standpoint. And this is also a guy that is the first linebacker, the second linebacker outside of Lorenzo Carter, who we know is an athletic freak, that Gettleman was able to draft and that Gettleman brought in. And I read an article, we all read, I'm sure a lot of you read this article from the offseason where Gettleman talked about how he really changed his process when it comes to evaluating and drafting defensive linebackers at that second level during his time with the Panthers. And you saw it with the pick of Shaq Thompson over there, the first-round linebacker they took there in the first when he was with the Panthers. So I think Davis is kind of in the mold of what Gettleman and the Giants want as that inside linebacker position moving forward. And I think he's somebody who could really prove to be part of the solution moving forward. But moving on a little bit from those players, there were a few questions I wanted to get to before we get to a preview of this game. The first one is, Nick, after kind of I know you made your case on him a little bit earlier, but revisiting it, let's say, has Curtis Riley shown you enough to be kind of a long-term fixture on this defense?
Yes, because whether or not it's at free safety and they go get someone who's higher priced to be that, say elite, but just say, higher end, almost Pro Bowl level type guy, which again, they do exist and they are expensive. I still think his physicality and his traits going downhill within coverage, I think that he can be there. The other thing that I have not mentioned in my defense of Curtis Riley, which I guess I should, is the Giants are playing a lot more pattern match. And one of the things that you really have to be kind of sad and not have a life and really just watch all 22 is when they're lining up for the plays. Chandler is often yelling at other guys, getting them in position. His FBI is higher than people give him credit for, and he has to be in that position, being in the free safety mold. That's a big deal. Specifically, I've seen more than a few times yelling at BW Webb, and this stuff isn't super straightforward. It's not landmark zone, and so I like that element to his game where it's like, hey, like, if you want to be multiple, you need players that can handle it. If you want to do one thing, it's great. It frees them up to then, be more athletic. But the guys that, they need thinking people in these positions. I think that's a big part of why Ogletree is there. So within that whole structure, I think he can be there because he's grasping basically the defense.
Yeah, and on that note, speaking, and I think I would tend to agree with you on that, Nick. I think Riley's been a lot better than people realize this season. But on that note, something I thought was interesting, Nick, a guy who I actually think could also be on the roster bubble heading into the offseason. And that's Rhett Ellison, a tight end who they signed for a 4-year, $18 million contract last year. And he was a top 10 run blocker overall, according to Pro Football Focus, last year in Mike Solari's blocking scheme, in Pat Shurmur, Mike Shula, and Hal Hunter's blocking scheme. He hasn't graded out well. He struggled with blocking in addition to not adding much in the passing game. And he has a pretty hefty salary cap hit in the 2019 season. I think it's possible the Giants could look to bring in a better blocking tight end to pair with Evan Ingram this offseason and then move on from Rhett Ellison and recoup that cap space. What do you think of that? And is there anything you've seen from Ellison that kind of, either puts you in one way or the other as far as his future with this team?
I think that overall, he's a guy that's got solid ability. He has not shown nearly the level of consistency to justify that salary. Dan and I don't talk a lot before the podcast, so we don't. This isn't like all set up, but I actually pretty much completely agree with him, and I actually think he's probably going to be the first player to get cut, just because it's that glaring. Where the backside of a lot of the defensive ends, whether it's Ingram or him if he's the inline tight end, it's very hard to block that defensive end in whatever running scheme they have, if that's what's being called. But it's not where it needs to be, and he's not good enough hands wise to make up for that difference. And I hate to make this comparison because but it's a guy that Dan likes. If you look at like where Dallas Goedert is a week 10 rookie, I would take Dallas Goedert over Red Ellison in terms of longer term perspective. But right now, Dallas Goedert is like much better of a blocker. And that kind of scares me just in terms of what they're willing. Number one, what they're doing on the line, and number two, where he is and the contract that he has. And I just think it's going to be a target in the offseason.
No doubt, Nick. And it's surprising for me to say because I went into the season with high expectation for Ellison. I thought he would be kind of an X factor type player on this offense due to his blocking and underrated ability catching the football. But that's what's really popped out to me as well, Nick. I really think he's struggled as a blocker this season. And if he's struggling as a blocker, you're not going to get – it's just not somebody you can afford to have in an offense that really wants to use 12 personnel when they're not playing from behind every game, which hopefully will be the case in 2019 or maybe down the stretch run here. And just one more question I wanted to get into before we dove into the preview of this game, and that would be, I know you've defended him before and I've gone the opposite route, but just in your mind, Nick, does Shurmur deserve some blame, or does Shurmur deserve a lot of blame, or any blame, if he can't find some offensive consistency over the final 8 games of the season, given the talent that he has around him?
Yeah, and all this definitely has to, it falls on a lot of people's heads, but, in terms of him being a leader and understanding how to get the best of his players, 110%, he has to get at least a chunk of this, at least. The other side of this is guys like me, like I said, I wrote 10,000 words before the season on why we thought Manning would thrive in this offense. So I was very wrong, number one. But number two, the other part of that, is there's some level of disconnect, and I wouldn't just call it with the quarterback position. The game can always be called better. I just think that when guys get specific on Twitter and things, they try to call out specific things. It gets a little hairier because it's hard to know exactly what the setup is. And so that's where I defend a lot of play callers in that regard. But in general, that you are what your record says you are. And this offense, specifically in the red zone, needs something different. And I think it actually starts more with the running attack in that regard, or featuring Barkley more in that regard. We've talked about that at length. But so I definitely think that he definitely shoulders a big part of it. And that's just the nature of the beast, being the play caller.
Yeah, and we talked about it a lot in the last podcast, so I won't go into all the jet sweep action and some of the 21 personnel and the 2 back looks with Gallman and Barkley's not using, and Evan Ingram usage and all of that. But to me, it's been glaring and almost as glaring as the quarterback play and the play of the offensive line. Not quite there for me, but close for sure. Let's dive into a little 49ers preview, Nick. I was looking at this game. I was looking at some of the all-22, like I said, over the past, the first 8 games. And just from what I've seen from the 49ers on the broadcast, I'm not going to lie, I haven't dove into their all-22. And I know you have, so that's why I'm going to direct this question at you. Do you think, because I believe it's possible, do you think that James Bettcher's defense can have kind of a coming-out party and a dominant effort against Nick Mullins on Monday night?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be the best part of the game, just because he and Bettcher and Shanahan have faced each other 3 times in the last 2.5 years, just because they were divisional rivals. And then last year, the Cardinals did play Atlanta. Sorry, in 2016, the Cardinals did play Atlanta, and so they faced each other a few times. Shanahan's a great play caller. Shanahan's a great play designer. The X factor, I think, could be the Giants' coverage, specifically against the rookie. In Mullins, who, although he had a very good outing and he does some things very well, the score and the results of that Oakland game do not really reflect basically how poor the Oakland defense played. And it wasn't, I don't even know if they gave up or not, but all the big plays were basically missed tackles. And so I wouldn't can he function in that offense? Yes, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere close to even the understanding that CJ Beathard had within the offense. So with that said, I definitely think they can, and he's a guy that I think they can confuse in coverage is the way to say it. So I think that's something too, where when you look at the historical matchup that Betcher has had with Shanahan, Betcher has played and had played a ton of man coverage. That was mostly because last year San Francisco's offensive, their wide receiver grouping was not as strong. So I think that's why they did it. And Betcher had a bunch of defensive backs he knew very well in Arizona. This year, I think the pattern match and the different looks that they give in the secondary may cause turnovers for sure.
No doubt. And I started to like the signs I've seen from this Betcher defense over the last 2 games alone, just with the Falcons and Redskins efforts that they put together. I think he's starting to come. I think he's starting to finally feel comfortable using a lot of the same blitz concepts that he used in Arizona, and with Olivier Vernon back in the mix. So I think they're going to have a big effort. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on just from the schematic standpoint in this matchup, the Giants versus 49ers?
On the other side of the ball, if we can go there, the one thing, just to go back to the Giants running game, DeForest Buckner is a freak. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. He's an awesome pass rusher. You will not see more active hands than this guy's hands. If anyone's ever seen him on broadcast tape, it's like he looks like he could, I don't know, I can't think of a good analogy. It's scary. You can, though, run against him. He does not stand up that well against combo blocks. So particularly the left side of the line, when they run into the boundary schemes where the tight end is very close to is on the short side of the field, he lines up on that side of the field in the 4-eye position. So it's basically on the inside right eye of the left tackle in that regard. I think they can double team him, and I think they can create some big seams there with multiple different, not just inside zone, but multiple different other schemes too. Basically a boundary sweep that they ran once in the last game. Stuff like that I do think they have a good chance for. So I think that's something, again, I think that this is a game where if they don't produce offensively here, I think you got to kind of roll your eyes a little bit.
Yeah, and you got to maybe make a decision to change quarterbacks or whatever you need to do. I mean, they had extra time with the bye week to bring in some new run game concepts. So I do think we'll see those in this game. But we'll see what happens Monday night. And we'll move on now to some questions from the listeners. And we start with Freddie Blassie, who says, Cameron Moore was not dressed for a game this season, but yet we cut a serviceable return man in Quadri Henderson instead. Besides the Brown signing, why are they making so many bad personnel decisions? So I'll start with this one, Nick. I'm not going to judge these. I think they've actually been fine with their in-season personnel decisions, getting rid of Flowers, benching Omame. Even the decision to cut Quadri Henderson doesn't really surprise me that much when you realize that at practice this week, Henderson was returning punts with, guess who? Corey Coleman, who was added to the roster. And you know what? While I did like Henderson a lot in the returns he put together for the Giants in his one game last week, and he was a really dynamic return man at Pittsburgh at the collegiate level, I think Corey Coleman could actually add more to the return game. He's a more explosive athlete. He also has experience and success returning punts. So to me, I think that, when they had to make room to on the roster when they activated RJ McIntosh, and they weren't going to get rid of a safety because they need defensive backs, they were going to get rid of one of these receivers. They have so many of these types of, receiver/return men on the back end of that roster. So, why did they get rid of Quadri Henderson instead of Joel Davis? That I don't know. I think they probably believe that Davis is more long-term upside as an actual receiver. Joel Davis, the undrafted rookie out of Bethune-Cookman, and also a faster player than Henderson for what it's worth. He can add opening up the defense, being that knife down the seam. But again, I don't know exactly why they decided to make that decision, but I know why they decided to move on from him. And again, Henderson was re-signed to the Giants practice squad after clearing waivers earlier today. So, all is well. All is well there in case the Giants need him again to bring him back for that return game. What do you kind of see there, Nick, with some of their personnel decisions?
Nothing to add from the film perspective, to be fair, just because it's not something I really focus on. But I do appreciate the question from the sense that this is what their 12th return guy.
Yeah.
So that if you want to ask it within that context, yes. Within this specific one, I don't really know. But I think that gets into a special teams kind of. Have they been good? I don't judge special teams, but just from optically, it doesn't really feel that good. So I think that, this is an area they got to kind of clean up, and it's hard to say if, a lot of these head coaches that have special teams backgrounds end up, obviously their special teams, so they become head coaches are great. Shermer does not seem to be that kind of guy, and I don't really think that they may not have the right answers that they need in the special teams department right now.
No doubt. Giants Dreamer asked, what is the Giants' plan to keep talking about since day one? It seems like it changes on the fly, and that equates to no plan at all. But I'll just start by saying this, Giants Dreamer. When Dave Gettleman, took over, he said Rome wasn't built in one day. There's going to be a lot of changes that I'm going to make to this roster, and it's going to be fluid. And that's how every NFL roster looks. They don't need any kind of set plan. The plan is just get the best 53 guys on the roster. And it's going to be a tough, difficult test. They're cleaning house with what Jerry Reese built, not only with the amount of players they've moved on from and the amount of the fluidity of the player transaction, but also in the sense that they're trying to get different kinds of players to be part of this Giants way, and that just means loving the game of football, having a passion for it, being good locker room guys, leader types. So it's just, to me, I'm not worried about this. There's so many other issues with the Giants. I'm not worried about them not having a plan. I think there is a plan. It's just getting the best 53 guys. And I think moves like the decision to claim Jamon Brown off of waivers kind of proves that. Do you see it any differently, Nick?
No, it's something where we kind of have incomplete information. I think that if you can say I think you can get into the specifics of Gettleman stylistically of how he feels about maximizing value of any transaction. I think that's one discussion, but specifically with the plan, I kind of think I think people have to remember, like, you can have a great plan and be Sashi Brown and get like 1 billion picks and set the team up and then get fired. So you have to keep in mind that turnarounds can happen very quickly. And I think that they're trying to be as opportunistic as they can, even as they now kind of, like you said, clean house.
Sure. And Josh Perlman asks, how are the Giants handling the Kyle Lauletta situation? So they had in-house discipline, whatever that is worth. They won't suspend him. And I think they're kind of just moving on from it. Lauletta had a really heartfelt apology yesterday about it. I've gone on the record as saying I'm not really viewing this as anything that I'm concerned about personally. So I think that's kind of just how they're going to handle it. I mean, if you're asking in the sense that you hope he's suspended or whatnot, that's not going to happen. I mean, Shermer already made that clear on Tuesday. So we'll move on from that. Andre asks, have you heard the talk about Tampa Bay moving on from Jameis Winston this offseason? I think it's crazy, but I think there's still a place for him in this league. Should the Giants take a look?
I think Tampa Bay will move on from him. I think the Giants should look at everyone they can. I just don't think that he's thrown on tape the consistency that you'd want to pay anything more than a backup number for. And that sounds really harsh. The guy's been part of one of the best offenses in terms of talent, and this year they've got one of the more interesting offensive coordinators. So I really have very little to no interest there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the issue. The issue is supply and demand. I mean, Jameis Winston, you look at the quarterback market, what they get paid. Sam Bradford, $15 million this past offseason, or was it 12 or 15? I mean, Jameis Winston's not going to accept a backup deal. I don't think Eli Manning is either. In a perfect world, taking a flyer on Jameis Winston for a 1-year mid-range contract might not be the worst idea as you transition in a rookie quarterback or Kyle Lauletta or whoever, wait for the 2020 class, whatever you want to do there. But for what he's going to want and for what the market will demand for Jameis Winston, a quarterback who's still young, still a top draft pick, and former top draft pick, has flashed at times, I just don't think it's an investment you want to make. This is a guy who turns the ball over at a very high frequency, has had trouble both off the field, both at the collegiate level with suspensions and at the NFL level with suspensions. So it's just not a situation I think the Giants will make from that standpoint. It's not a situation decision I think they should. Okay. Rob asks, Warford makes blocking the stunt. Okay, so I'll preface this one, Nick, because I just thought this was interesting, so I included it. I posted a clip of how dominant the Saints offensive line has been. It was a breakdown from I think it was Brandon Thorne, offensive line guy on Twitter. And Rob asked me, like, look, he looked at the play and he says, how come Earl Watford's making blocking a stunt by Aaron Donald look so easy? Why does the Giants offensive line had such a hard time picking up simple stunts? So I kind of wanted to ask throw that to you, Nick, because you're more of you understand this a little bit better than I do. What is the issue with the Giants picking up defensive line stunts?
I think it was there earlier in the season. I think it's still present, and I think it's something that all lines battle with on some level. But specifically for the Giants, I think the bigger issues on the right side were clearly identification. And so when a tackle, let's just say it's a TE stunt, the tackle is going first basically to the outside, then the end is looping around him. Whenever you see a TE or an ET stunt, the first letter is the guy who goes first. So if it's TE stunt and he's doing that, usually what the Giants had issue with was the guard was not realizing that. So as he's passing off the tackle to the defensive tackle to the offensive tackle, he's not getting his head or eyes in the right spot to then have the agility to go back basically into his kind of lane, if you want to think of it that way, or to where the lane where the rusher's going and pick up the looping end. So I think it was definitely a recognition thing. I think part of this comes into situational play, to how you're coached, to what I saw with the Giants is they improved a little bit as the game went on, meaning the more stunts they saw, the better they were at it. I think it's recognition. I think in some guys, like I mentioned with the new right guard Brown, he has a little bit of an issue with this too, but it's specifically not recognition. It's him getting his head where it needs to be to where his play speed actually gets him back across the line. I think he's recognizing it. I think he's not getting to where he needs to be when he loses against stunts. So in a lot of these things, it's always like a little specific detail. And a lot of times that does come down to coaching to be able to basically to kind of get over that. I think, again, though, I think all lines are susceptible to this. Some are more so than others. You're talking about the Saints line that's been the best offensive line, top 3 offensive line in the last 2 years. A group that's been together for a while, a group that's got the same coaches. All that continuity counts not because the line calls get any easier. It's not really the line calls. It's knowing what to do just because you've seen the reps with the same people and all the little adjustments that they make when the tackle that we're talking about, that's the initial driver and that's done when he's coming from a different position or a different angle or different timing. They're just used to seeing it so many times that the repetitions count.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's something the Giants are going to have to hope to improve with time. Consistency and playing together on an offensive line plays a big role. You saw it with the 2007, 2008 Giants offensive line. You saw it with the Steelers offensive line I mentioned earlier today when I was breaking down Mike Munchak and why he helped the Giants so much. You see it with the Saints as well, as Nick just broke down. So that's something the Giants are just going to have to, figure out as time goes. But, having a guy like Jamon Brown come in, potentially give them that solution at right guard, just gives them one more player that they don't have to replace this offseason, and maybe makes it so next year they enter the 2019 season with 3 of the same guys in Solder, Hernandez, and Brown on the offensive line. And then a 4th maybe with Jalapeno, a guy that they're excited about, a guy that graded out well during his first start and a half of the Giants before the injury, the guy who they liked during the preseason. And then you turn and you look at it, and maybe there's only one starter that needs to be replaced, and they can kind of build on the continuity. But that's kind of a look further ahead. And on that note, we're going to sign off for today's podcast. But before we do that, I do want to go over a little house cleaning. If you do enjoy the podcast, please, please, please subscribe on iTunes, the Big Blue Banter. Download them. It'll help us build our numbers. Find us on Spreaker as well, where you can find the rest of all of our content there. And you can find me on Twitter at Dan Schneier NFL. That's DANSCHNEIER NFL. I'll continue the conversation with anyone there, as always. And then you can also find my work by downloading the CBS Sports app and clicking Giants as your favorite team and then clicking to turn on notifications. I promise you won't get more than 1 notification a day unless it's a big news day. And then otherwise you can just kind of browse the app and look through the content that you like from me and choose to read or not read it based on that. Nick, where can we find all of your work?
On Twitter, TManic21 is my handle. I write for Inside the Pylon and Cover One. Cover One is all the Giants material. I've got to pick up my YouTube channel. I haven't posted there in a while, and on the message boards, been a little quiet this week during the bye week.
And that's to be expected from the bye week. But we're still here. We're bringing you guys the goods, hopefully. So on that note, we're going to sign off for today. We will talk to you next week after the Giants game against the 49ers, potentially with a new starting quarterback. We will find out then. On that note, take it easy, guys. Have a good weekend, and go Giants.